Hi everyone, I am very happy to present you a pretty broad topic that's general graphics optimization. It will be more like an introduction, so in this session we will just see some critical important points and vectors of optimization in the 3D graphics domain and possible implementations that can be used on the PSP or just more general homebrew. So to start, let's have a short portfolio of who am I, just to set the frame, or just so you don't believe I am coming from the wild. So let's start with a balance of gravity that was at first just a scene I have made on Blender Cycles render engine, and that I was experimenting. But it looked so nice to me that I wanted to port it out on a game engine and tried it out on mobile, so I have chosen Unity. But I had to cover multiple issues since mobile devices wouldn't simply handle it as is. Also had to apply several optimization tricks, like for example pre-rendering it, use light maps, optimize dual cores, but we will see these methods further in this presentation. And finally, I have helped getting Pixar renderment features working on Blender using an open source implementation. If we don't know already, renderment is the rendering engine that is behind most of the famous Disney animation movies, and so it was mostly getting a good implementation of the physically realistic Disney shader under the shader node system, by leaning to the physically based shading theory, which is mostly material physics. So let's start with the actual topic, introducing graphics. So before to get to the list, let's see the two most popular ways of rendering. The first is rasterization, where triangle data is just transformed as matrix trigonometric transformations to be able to be drawn on the camera view plane, which is pretty performant compared to the second one, which is ray tracing, where rays coming from the camera are simulated to go everywhere in the scene. And in case of collision of objects, these rays get reflected to other objects, explaining, for example, the nice looking reflections. However, as you wonder, despite its photorealism, it does use way too much computational power to be even considered for real-time rendering. And as much as I would like to explain more in details the rendering process, unfortunately time and topic doesn't allow us, so let's see next. We start with dual core sorting and batching that can be very effective in some situations. We have here two render curves, one not ordered and one obviously ordered. As you can see on the first example, we get 5 draw cores. Draw cores are simply a core from the CPU to render something like render draw hair. And on the second ordered example, we only have 3 draw cores, almost half. So why that? Simply because the GPU is highly parallelizable. And for example, when you draw a blue triangle and then draw a red and transparent triangle, the GPU have to do it separately because they don't share the same material. In the hypothesis, they have other same properties. So basing an ID per object and sorting it, we can address 4 draw codes of the same property objects, and so the GPU will be able to do it all at once because they share the same material. So one draw core for 4 objects. It's pretty good for simple scenes because you just group together a lot of objects for an ever same performance. Now let's discuss light baking. In a scene rendering, the calculation of light effects on object take a lot of time, especially when there are a lot of lights. So to overpass that, a pretty recent method allows us to bake other lights into a texture and use that texture where light effect is already applied, and the best thing is that you can bake that light by using ray tracing renderers, which produce a realism you can never get in real time. The only bottleneck is that this method can only be used on static objects, because the texture where the light is static and so its influence is static, and that most of the time the texture generated are pretty large, so you need to atlas them and to compress them a lot. And level of details, of course, they are probably one of the most used methods to optimize efficiently a game. Basically, multiple versions of one object are made, and they are used depending on how far and that object is far from the player. More the player is far from that object, more the object will be less detailed, hence the name level of detail. That method can be used for all types of objects in a scene, but it really does the difference on large environments. That takes a lot of computational power to render. For example, SSX and Tau use the level of detail design for mountains, and especially for mountains, so the player can always have a global view on its environment and not directly the skybox. And yeah, no, you definitely shouldn't waste your memory. It is already when the textures takes a lot of place in RAM or any other memory just because they can be in any way procedurally generated. Not like, for example, terrains that can be described by a map basic curves. For that, compression is the best solution. To hopefully still use textures, a bland world wouldn't be very exciting, and have an acceptable size on memory. Multiple algorithms exist for this method, but the PSP uses a pretty efficient algorithm developed by S3 Graphics, and despite its age, that at the time of Transform Lighting Graphics made graphics cards, except for if the engine used to create the game has its own way to compress textures. But it wouldn't be hardware accelerated, so that would be a bummer. And now we have spoken how to exploit efficiently the hardware, but did we thought about optimizing the hardware itself? Optimizing hardware is a huge concern because it's the part that consumes the energy, and we know how much it's critical on handheld consoles such as the PSP to save energy for maximum autonomy. It isn't fun to recharge it every 5 minutes, not fun at all, so it's only very recently with smartphones and mobile games that the industry really started to think about this matter. And it has been found that logarithmic arithmetic is far more efficient than the normal arithmetic. Any operation, when converted to a logarithmic approach, gets incredibly simplified. For example, multiplication become additions and divisions become subtractions that can be calculated very easily by current arithmetic units. It is not as precise as dedicated units, but for 3D graphics it's totally acceptable, as seen in the comparison on an actual example that you can find in the bottom of the slide. The only problem with this optimization needs special hardware in order to perform the conversion to logarithmic values, but it's really worth it on a lot of graphic chips. Moreover, in smartphones is doing this. So it will be the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.